There's nothing you can do, I say. There's no food. I have enough to last until we get to Arid, and then a few months more. Even if your government gave me the astrophage to go home, I wouldn't survive the trip. Eat Arid food. We evolved from same life. We use same proteins, same chemicals, same sugar. Must work. No, I can't eat your food, remember? You say it's bad for you. We find out. I hold up my hands. It's not just bad for me. It will kill me. Your whole ecology uses heavy metals all over the place. Most of them are toxic to me. I'd die immediately. He trembles. No. You no can die. You are friend. But yeah, let's see. How am I doing? I'm good. I was just on the coast for the weekend, which was really nice. Like, went out to Seaview, Washington, which is just on the other side of the Columbia from Astoria. Mm. It's one of those bridges where, like, on the Astoria side, it's like a big, tall bridge because, like, container ships have got to go underneath it. And then...
And the river's what, like 3 miles wide at that point or something like that?
It's quite wide. Like, it's really wide at Astoria. It's really, at that point, more of a, like, you're like, this is a bay at this point.
Well, with a current pushing out a third of the United States' water drainage, like, out, or at least the continental, certainly the western United States. Yeah.
Whenever we're in science fiction land, I feel like our own like world, our life narratives, our life metaphors also take on this sort of like grand scale.
Yeah.
Like we're thinking about continent-sized stuff.
That part of Oregon, whenever I hear anything about it, I always think of Sometimes a Great Notion and or Washington. And there's this moment where I think it's sort of the first kind of rhapsodic first chapter where Kesey describes setting a bucket of bright, brand new 8-penny nails out on the porch. And, you know, if you forget to bring them inside the house, they're completely rusty by the morning. Everything is rotting from the foggy humidity of the coastal rainforest.
Yeah, it is quite wet there, and that was definitely the experience of 48 hours there. But it was lovely. And I leave for the Birkebeiner on Wednesday.
You were going to the Birkebeiner in my former part of the country, the Upper Midwest. You are very welcome to it. I'm enjoying Florida, where the weather is much warmer than it will be at the Birkebeiner.
Yeah, it's going to be fucking cold.
Yeah, it will be cold. I mean, Wisconsin that time of year must be pretty amazing. I always wanted to go up to the UP. The few times I've gone to Copper Harbor in the UP, which is yet like another 5 hours of driving north of where the Birkebeiner is. You crest this hill near Copper Harbor, and then there's this like pole that's like 28 feet tall or 35 feet tall, and it's got several red lines on it, and this is the blizzard of like 1967, and that one's at like 18 feet, and they're like, this is the blizzard of like 1974, and that one's at 25 feet. This is the blizzard of 2003, and that one's at like 32 feet or something. Holy like that shit. Like just like I was like, I didn't realize that there was that kind of snowpack in the lower 48, except for maybe outside of the Rockies. I didn't know that happened, but
yeah.
Well, why don't we get into it? Why don't we each want to try a 3.5 sentence recap and see? And
each of us gets 3.5 sentences to do one of the three major pieces of the second half of the book. Is that what you mean?
I was actually going to propose is we each get 3.5 sentences to do the entire second half of the book, and so it's like a little bit of a competition.
Yeah, okay, I like it. I'm into it,
and without any time to rehearse or prepare, because I don't know what I'm going to say. Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first? Do you feel like you're ready?
You can go. Do you want me to go first? I've spent a lot of time in Plotland today, so maybe it's a little easier for me.
Go ahead.
And okay, so There are, basically three major arcs or ups and downs over the second half of the book. Sentence number 1. Rocky and Ryland Grace go to a planet named Adrian and almost blow up the ship while trying to collect a sample of Adrian's atmosphere. Okay, that's sentence 1. Sentence 2. Ryland and Rocky both almost killed after the sample collection, but they save each other, comma, and discover that there is a natural predator to astrophage that can save both their planets. That natural predator eats the Hail Mary's fuel sources, and then later eats Rocky's fuel sources, comma, and Dr. Grace chooses to go and save Rocky instead of saving himself. Period. Now a fragment. Earth and Arid saved.
It's pretty good. I don't know that I can beat that. Certainly the first sentence. All right, here's without thinking too much about it. Rocky and Grace almost die collecting an organism that turns out to be the predator of astrophage and the savior of their planets, comma, named Taumeba.
Nice. Good job.
Meanwhile, back in the past, Grace remembers that he was asked to volunteer for this mission, refused, and was made to go anyway by Strat, period. The Taumeba starts destroying both ships. Grace figures, but Grace figures it out in time and saves Rocky, period. Grace gets a happy ending as a teacher. No, I'd have to do a fragment. So X that one. Grace, happy. What's Rocky's planet? Arid.
Arid.
Grace, happily teaching on Arid.
Very nice. What I like about yours that I missed and forgot was that, like, oh my God, the flashback about Grace realizing that he was compelled and forced to go on the Project Hail Mary is the emotional beating heart of this entire novel. Right. It's very ironic that I forgot that this time.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, like, everything that I want to talk about that I've prepped, almost everything has to do with that, too.
Nice.
To me, that's the most fascinating thing. So that's great. I feel like we both did a pretty good job of that. So let's... why don't you start us off with your discourse on the structure of the book and let me know how I can be useful to that.
Yeah, so as I was thinking about this book and what we talked about last time, that there is a lot of video game structure to it, that the opening chapters of the book essentially work the same way that a video game does, where there are escalating levels of stakes. And first, it's just, what is your name? And that's that's what the book opens with. And our main character slowly educates himself in the same way that you do in a video game, through trial and error, and learning how the game works. And there is a great book about structuring your storytelling for role-playing games called Hamlet's Hit Points, by kind of one of the luminaries of role-playing thought, this guy named Robin D. Laws. And he and his podcast partner, Kenneth Haidt, have a great show that's just called Rob and Ken Talk About Stuff. Hamlet's Hit Points is a really helpful book for game masters, mostly because it talks about structuring your narratives in ways that make your players actually care about the game. And there's this really great chapter where he goes through Hamlet and walks through the different kinds of beats that you can experience in any kind of, really in any kind of narrative work. He breaks things down into, let's see, what are the different types of beats? So procedural, which is basically stuff happening. It's plot, things like that need to happen. Dramatic, which tends to be kind of like emotional negotiation with others. And that can be, conflict where you're seeing people argue or fight or that kind of thing. But the nature of this kind of beat is that it moves the protagonist and maybe the other characters towards a place of positive inner transformation, which I think is really important for this book. Commentary, which the book points out should be used seldomly. But it's basically when you're like, okay, I need to get a lot of exposition in how am I going to do it in a way that's not just like turning towards the camera and being like, you might want to know about rocket ships. The book points out that ancient theater achieves this through choruses. Shakespeare uses clowns, stuff like that. Anticipation is a moment when the audience sort of lives alongside the narrator and gets to experience upcoming success. That feeling of like, oh my God, something good is about to happen. Gratification, just a general emotional upbeat, like a positive section of a book. A downbeat, a negative emotion section of a book.
Just by the way, as you're going through these, I'm scrolling along in the book, and the examples of each are just wonderful in and of themselves. I know they're great,
aren't they? Yeah, they're so good. This next one, I was wondering if you had some experience with, because you've been working with like screenplay and teleplay stuff, but it's called a pipe. A beat that surreptitiously provides us with information we'll need later. Yeah. And it says the term comes from screenwriting parlance and compares exposition to plumbing. You need it for your house to work properly, but you don't want to see it.
I'd never heard that term before, but I'm very, very familiar with the concept of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was one of those where I was like, oh, yeah, this is necessary. But, I think it's one of those that until you see it drawn out, you're like, oh, is this really, And there's several moments of that when I was kind of reading for like, and we'll get to this when we kind of go through it, but there's a moment in chapter 16 where we learn that Ryland is coma resistant. Right. And it's a flashback. And that's definitely a moment where you're like, oh, I think I'm seeing why he probably ended up on the ship.
Dubois' nitrogen is a pipe.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. That's needed to be there for another reason, but ends up being 100% crucial to the survival of our protagonists.
And interestingly, it's introduced at the same time as a gun, which does raise the question of whether or not the gun is going to prove to be important. But I've identified a concept that I'm calling the false Chekhov's gun, which is where the gun is. But we can move on. But
it's like a shell game. Like so many people are used to the concept of Chekhov's gun. Right. When you see a gun come up, your attention is drawn to that, and the author can be doing some like narrative sleight of hand.
In this case, the fake gun actually hides the pipe of the nitrogen.
Totally. Question beat. Question introduce a point of curiosity we want to see satisfied. The example in here is the crew of the Nostromo receives a distress call. And You're like, perfect.
Great example. In our book, something seems to be keeping the astrophage in check at Tau Ceti.
Yes,
what
exactly.
Could it be?
What is that? And then a reveal. A reveal provides the information we were made to desire. I kind of went through the second half of the book because the thing that I feel like is masterful about this book, like we talked about last time, he's not really into like big lyrical flights of fancy. The writing, even though there are moments that are quite lovely in their sort of like simplicity and their repetitiveness in a good way, it's the prose is generally tuned to clear, effective, straightforward writing.
Yeah.
And I think the you know, and it would be easy to look at a book like this and see a lot of like middle stuff, like middlebrow. Like, oh, it's sci-fi. Oh, it's about saving the world. Oh, it's a bromance. And miss the fact that actually I think that it is really quite elegantly plotted. Because in the second half of this book, we get a series of challenges of different kinds of beats, of upbeats and downbeats. And what's really interesting is every upbeat raises the stakes. When they go to the planet Adrian, they don't know what they're looking for yet. They know that they need to get a sample from the planet, and they go through this amazing and very high stakes hijink where the Project Hail Mary is pointed at a 30-degree angle, sort of bouncing on the atmosphere by using its spin drive. And because of the enormous amount of energy from the spin drive, basically ionizing the atmosphere, trailing a 10-kilometer chain made of xenonite, all to collect a sample of planet Adrian's atmosphere, which may hold the clue to saving both Earth and Arid. They're successful. They rupture 2 of the fuel tanks, and both Grace and Rocky are almost killed. Grace through the fact that the ship is put into a spin that he can't control, and he's basically going to black out and die on the Project Hail Mary. Rocky comes into his part of the ship to save him, and Rocky is therefore almost killed. Maybe Rocky is saved. Maybe Grace is saved. And they do discover that there is a natural predator for astrophage. So now they have like the thing they're looking for. So now the stakes are up, because even before then the stakes were high, 2 planets. But since humans are like loss averse, now that they've got the thing, now the stakes are even higher.
Right.
And so now the stakes are about like, okay, we're successful. We've got it. Now we have to get out of the atmosphere. Now we have to oh shit. It's eating the fuel. The thing that we just thought was amazing is eating the fuel. Like, now what? And then there's like a whole nother arc of that, of moving through figuring out how to get the Project Hail Mary working and figuring out how to breed nitrogen-resistant Talmeba so it can survive in both Venus and 3 worlds' atmospheres and save Arid and save Earth. And we think we've done it. Success! Like, oh. But in the same way, now that success breeds the next raise in stakes, which is Rocky is left derelict and Grace has to make a big choice whether he is going to save himself or save his friend. And what's funny is like the stakes of Earth are sort of satisfied in like a little bit of a hand wave. He's like, I sent the Beatles to Earth and I went looking for my friend. And so the stakes shrink from solar system sized, of the fate of 2 planets, to personal sized. Yeah. Like the fate of this man's way of thinking about himself because of his behavior to his friend. And the book then becomes like a personally emotional, like very high stakes novel.
A redemption narrative.
Yeah.
And that's the reason we find out, that's the reason Grace has amnesia. And that's the reason we find out about his, I hesitate to use the word cowardice, although that's the term, but that's such a pejorative. What we're calling cowardice is an extremely normal human way for somebody to feel in the situation that he was in. But Grace feels that he's a coward. And so the stakes are, he's been called a coward by Strat. he himself feels he's a coward. And so his very last action taking in the third beat of the second half is to do something completely selfless to rescue his friend, because as far as he knows, he's going to die too. And that is, you're right, the stakes have collapsed. And I think, we should, first of all, we should publish this chart at uppermiddlebrow.com, listener, and on social media so people can explore it. Because I think it would be hard to follow the work that you've done here in terms of you've broken it down into quite a few beats with quite a few beat labels here. And you've given a few examples. But I agree with your general point, and it reminds me of a story that I'm somewhat familiar with. And I think your general point is that the structure of this book is where the elegance and the beauty of this book lies. And the way that you know it is that the moments of gratification and the make you feel really good, the bring downs make you feel really bad. You don't notice the pipes until they're relevant, because if you see it right away, it's less fun, right? When you have a plot element that's been properly foreshadowed but is still a surprise, that is the most satisfying form of when you're like, that makes total perfect sense, and I had no idea that was going to happen. And then you read the book the second time, you start noticing the pipes, but then you don't mind them because you're admiring the elegance of the plumbing. The important emotional beat is knowing that Grace actually didn't volunteer. He was forced to go on this mission because he was a coward. And that is the emotional stakes that have to be overcome in the very final beat. Mm-hmm. You don't see it coming when Grace turns that rocket around and goes, help Rocky out. Like, I don't know if you had a tear in your eye or not, but like,
oh my God. Yeah.
It is so satisfying. But it's also not surprising. And this is my one sort of mild complaint about this, perhaps, is that one of the things that maybe throws it off a little bit, though, is that by the time we learn that he was a coward, he has already risked his life to save Rocky once. Mm-hmm. So that was actually kind of like one of my questions for you is that a little bit of sand in the Vaseline right there?
No, it's not. I have an answer for this.
Go ahead.
And this is one of the great joys of amnesiac characters, is that you can have them do things that are out of character before they have the revelation of who they actually are.
Yeah.
And so, because up until the point that they learn about who they are, they're essentially a blank slate to themselves. And so I think him choosing to save Rocky in the, right after Rocky saves him is a piece of like creating his new personality. And because all he has to go on at the moment is the knowledge of the past 6 to 8 weeks of forging this very close friendship with this alien. And so he saves him, and it makes it even more powerful then to realize like, oh my God, like I was a coward. And I think that probably that might be the character shift that we want in a novel or a short story. But because it's so brilliantly structured, Weir hides it like another piece of pipe. It's just a piece of plausible behavior that we've seen so far. And then it makes it more plausible, I would even say inevitable, that he goes and saves Rocky.
Well, and in that moment where he saves him the first time, he's not trying to sacrifice himself to save him. He does get burned. And so it's a kind of clue that there is the possibility of redemption for the cowardice. Mm-hmm. He's been shown that he's willing to risk his life to save his friend, and to risk and in fact receive damage, physical damage. He gets burned. He gets chemically burned and physically burned from the ammonia and from touching Rocky's carapace. And so and I think you're right. That does make it, when he turns the ship around in the penultimate chapter and goes and rescues Rocky, you're not, that's consistent. And so you're able to both have the emotional stakes of, is he still a coward or not, with enough prefiguring so that when he does it, that doesn't feel like it just came out of nowhere. It feels
Yeah.
like he has experienced growth. He's changed.
And I think that's the magic of this particular book, is that it's a series of upbeats and downbeats. The upbeats get higher and the downbeats get deeper, but the trend line is up. And then there's a moment in the last two chapters of the book where Andy Weir like pulls like the carpet out from under you, and what you thought were like galactic level stakes turn out to be very personal level stakes. And it even heightens it even more that you're like, wow, Ryland Grace was a total asshole. It took the perhaps elimination of two species for him to learn how to be a human, how to be a good human. And that's what I think is so remarkable about this book, is that it does this incredible double life of like a very straightforward, very readable yarn with a really powerful emotional reversal towards the end of the book that feels that, like you said, like, reading the reading that I have prepared is the reading that definitely made me like choke up when I was reading it.
Do you want to do that one?
I was going to put mine towards like your question about happy endings. So let's see if we can get back around to it. Let's go with where you were going to go next. Okay. And then we'll see if my reading fits with your happy ending part.
One of the themes of this book, I think, is a moral dilemma. So there's Grace's journey as a protagonist, but there's also, I would say there's Rocky, but to me the real secondary protagonist is Eva Straat. Eva Straat makes, I think, the most challenging moral choice of this book, which is essentially there's an explosion at Baikonur. The primary and backup science crew member of the Project Hail Mary mission are both killed. And the third backup, we learn, who has coma resistance, is in fact Ryland Grace. And this satisfies a mystery. This entire time we're kind of like, wait, why did this guy get here? Because there were two people who were supposed to be on this mission. They die at the same time. Everybody on Project Hail Mary wants Grace to be the crew member, and he is understandably reluctant because it's a suicide mission. And he's mourning his friends. I don't necessarily see him as an asshole in this moment. He only has a few hours to kind of figure out what he wants to do. So Eva Straat says, Grace, will you be our crew member? He says, I need a few hours to think about it. A few hours go by. He comes back. They have a confrontation in her office with a soldier. And he says, I don't want to go. I don't think I should go. I think I'm more useful here. I need to help my kids prepare for the coming apocalyptic event. And Straat says, that's bullshit. You're scared. And he says, yeah, you're right. I am scared and I'm not going. And he starts to leave and the soldier stops him. And she says, well, I'm sorry it came to this, but I'm going to make you go. And essentially we're going to knock you out. And we're going to put you on the ship and we're going to give you medicine that's going to give you amnesia. So by the time you're going to be so far into the mission and solving the problem of astrophage that it's going to be too late for you to sabotage the you're going to stick with it. I know deep down you're a good guy. You're not going to sabotage the mission. Given no other choice but to save humanity, you're going to give it your best. So that's the end of that chapter. Then we get some more, Rocky and Grace in the present, dealing with Talmeba or whatever. And then we come back to where I want to do my reading, which is the final confrontation between Straat and Grace. So he's been in jail for a few days. They take him out of the jail and they take him to Grace's office, and she starts talking about how she studied history. And she talks about how through most of humanity's existence, we've not had enough food, and we've been in constant warfare with one another over food.
But the fun doesn't stop there, she said, because once the desperate, starving countries start invading each other for food, the food production will go down, Ever heard of the Taiping Rebellion? It was a civil war in China during the 19th century. 400,000 soldiers died in the combat, and 20 million people died from the resulting famine. She wrapped her arms around herself. I've never seen her look so vulnerable. Malnourishment, disruption, famine, every aspect of the infrastructure is going to food production and warfare. The entire fabric of society will fall apart. There will be plagues, too, lots of them, all over the world, because the medical care systems will be overwhelmed. Once easily contained outbreaks will go unchecked. She turned to face me. War, famine, pestilence, and death. Astrophage is literally the apocalypse. The Hail Mary is all we have now. I'd make any sacrifice to give it even the tiniest chance of success. I lay down on my bunk and faced away from her. Whatever lets you sleep at night. She walked back to the door and knocked on it. A guard opened it up. Anyway, I just wanted you to know why I'm doing this. I owed you that. Go to hell. Oh, I will. Believe me. You three are going to Tau Ceti. The rest of us are going to hell. More accurately, hell is coming to us.
The thing that surprises me about Grace's relationship with Strahd is that we never see that soften. Even when he's in space later, like he's still like I'm gonna get home and I'm gonna tell her off, like, and it doesn't seem to square. And maybe what Weir is doing is showing us a little bit of like the leftover Ryland Grace.
Yeah.
But I really love that section.
Everybody from time to time, I think, experiences selfish feelings. And everybody from time to time has aversion to self-sacrifice. And I've been in situations where maybe I felt like some institution was asking me to sacrifice safety or something, and perhaps the institution felt like it had a good reason for doing that. Mm-hmm. But I think what can really, really feel cruel is when one doesn't feel like one has a choice. And I think Strahd is basically saying, you don't matter. There's billions of lives at stake, and compared to them, you don't matter. And that might be objectively true, but at the same time, I think anytime a human's autonomy is taken away from them, that is also a terrible, terrible thing to take away from anybody. Yeah. And Strahd clearly feels bad about it. Grace feels angry about it. I think it's good in a way that he stays angry. But what I think is interesting, too, is I do think it raises the question of the need of the many versus the value of autonomy. And I think that liberty, autonomy, might be my chief human value. And depriving somebody of their autonomy and somebody of their liberty, forcing somebody to make a sacrifice they don't want to make. You know, Commander Yao, I think is his name, the Chinese commander, he's not willing to do that. He's basically saying, I'm not going to have someone who's not a volunteer on my mission. He's taking a kind of Kantian moral stance. It doesn't matter whether or not billions of lives are at stake. I'm not going to deprive somebody of their humanity. And Grace makes a different decision. She says, I am going to take away your sovereignty, and I'm going to do it in a really cold-blooded way. I'm going to knock you out, and you're even going to forget that I did that to you.
Right.
so that I can manipulate you. And what I think, and this is where the kind of happy ending thing comes in, is that I think part of what your point about the beauty of the structure and the positive and negative beats and the build-up, it allows us to get to a happy ending because Andy Weir has put the characters and put Grace through hell. And I think for something to kind of come across as upper middlebrow or literary, if you're going to have a happy ending, it has to be hard fought. It can't be an easy happy ending. And so that's achieved. But the thing that the happy ending, I think, does take away is a fair accounting of Strahd's moral decision. Because it's possible that Strahd would have sent Grace into space, and they would have failed anyway, and his sacrifice would have been completely in vain. It's possible that Grace would have died in space. It was likely. But instead, Grace gets a pretty happy ending. You know, he's got to deal with some malnutrition and some heavy gravity, but where he ends up, the happy ending, in a way, it might take away this book's ability to really grapple with Straught's case because everything turned out okay. So it clearly was the right decision. But what if it had been the wrong decision? Like, what if humanity had been blown up anyway? What if everybody had, like, killed each other in a nuclear war? What if Grace had failed? Or what if Grace, in fact, had starved to death, as he thought he was going to do when he, almost ran out of food? And so that's just kind of my observation around the happy ending, is that even though I think that the happy ending was earned as a craft, I think the downside of the happy ending is that it kind of cheats the moral question around Straught's decision to deprive Grace of his autonomy.
Yeah, totally. And like, I think, there's an easy solution that I'm glad he didn't take, which is to like, let us know what happened on Earth. And the reason I think that this question hovers in an uncomfortable and useful way is because we don't know what has been going on Earth. We don't know if there has been war. We know they fixed the problem because we do find out in the last chapter that Sol returns to normal luminance. But we have no clue about the intervening like hellscape, which still was probably pretty bad.
Yeah, although one can assume if there were still spacecraft that things didn't get as bad as they could have gotten.
We're not in like Station 11 territory,
right.
Or anything like that. But yeah, I hear you that the happy ending does, but that's such a. I mean, we're in the no blood, no foul territory,
right?
And you're like, really? like you can hurt someone real bad on a basketball court without causing blood.
Sure.
And that's taking a idiom where to the letter of the law instead of the spirit. But yeah, I see what you're getting at, and I think that it is necessary. Because what this book needs to function, what any book needs to function, is a tension of ideas. And Straught is willing to basically release her inner fascist to like get the job done. And then, and Grace's perspective is more of a humanist kind of thing, where we're talking about, that personal choice and personal freedom are the most important things that can be happening. And yeah, if it was an unhappy ending, it would be like, oh gosh, unhappy ending on top of like a revocation of of free will and autonomy. That would be pretty bad. That would not be fun.
It would be like a Lars von Trier film or something like that, where the narrative is actually unsatisfying, but the exploration of the moral dilemma becomes very satisfying. It's interesting because it's almost impossible to imagine this book with an unhappy ending. It's hard to imagine. I feel like it's rare in the sci-fi genre for that to happen. And I don't quite know what to make of it, other than there are kind of different paths to what we might call upper middlebrow. And once certain paths are chosen, other paths are no longer an option. And if we're going to have an happy ending, and if Grace is going to not die, and particularly a happy ending for Grace, like you could have a version of this book where Grace turns around, helps Rocky, and die. You still might call that a happy ending because he saves Earth, they save Arid, and Grace has his growth. And I guess maybe even what I'm getting here is that not only does he have his growth, not only does he save everybody, but he actually gets to have a happy retirement teaching a bunch of five-legged spiders about the speed of light. And, a very cute scene of him kind of playing the organ
Oh my God.
and speaking Iridian, and a bunch of little mini Rockies like raising their claws, that's lovely. It's beautiful. We want that for him. But I do think it also forestalls the possibility of really, really absorbing the emotional totality of Straught's choice in sending him against his will to sacrifice himself. And I think, I've been interviewing or reading interviews with a number of teachers who were asked to return to the classroom during the pandemic before many of them felt it was safe for the sake of the broader society. And I think that I'm particularly tuned to that resentment that one might feel when somebody is asking somebody to put themselves at risk, but particularly the person asking you is not also taking on that risk. And not that Straught wouldn't, but Straught is not, her role is not on a spaceship. Her role is to be doing the sort of the thing that she does. But still, Straught is safe. And I just think there's an inherent human resentment in that situation. I can't, maybe Grace shouldn't have been a coward. Maybe he should have volunteered to go on the mission. But I can't begrudge him his resentment. I think I would resent being shanghaied onto this mission and having my memory taken away from me forcibly.
Yeah, totally.
I think I would resent that deeply. And maybe one day I would come to see that Straught made the right decision or made a good decision, but I don't think just because things turned out well for me, I would be ready to do that right away.
Totally. Yeah,
and I think that makes it a better book too. That he's still
I was just
angry.
about to say,
Yeah.
I was like, book would not succeed without that real radical raising of personal stakes.
No, and you'd have a pretty good, ordinarily good, like probably would still sell sci-fi novel without that.
Yeah.
If everything were the same, this would still be a delightful first contact novel. But I do think it is the fact that Grace refused to go on the mission and Straught made him grow that elevates this book. We're discovering, you asked me, well, what is Upper Middlebrow? We've been having that conversation. And I think that's what elevates it to that point, because it really makes it emotionally and morally complex story, as opposed to a simple adventure story that the good guys win in the end.
Which, is one of those things where, like science fiction is... It generally is a positive genre, because like the movement of science is towards illumination. Like that's the whole point of science, is to like figure things out, and it would generally make for like really not fun books if you're like, oh, the science didn't work, everybody died.
We should at some point read the Three Body trilogy. Have you read those?
No.
Okay. Chinese, a guy named, I believe his name is Liu Cixin, if I'm saying it correctly. I think he's considered like the greatest Chinese sci-fi writer, certainly of this era. And Ken Liu, the Chinese-American writer, has been translating his novels brilliantly. So those one day, those would be interesting to read in light of the conversation we just had. But that's literally a story for another time, or three stories for another time.
Well, I think that's a good place to go to my reading about the denial that comes along with friendship.
Yeah.
Because I think it, like we get to a place, like Grace gets to a place where he is able to make the ultimate sacrifice for a friend. And watching Rocky's reaction to it, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I got to put this book down and like go for a little walk around the block.
Is this like Can Die?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that one got me too.
Yeah. So context, Grace has returned to find Rocky's derelict Blip A floating in space. Talmiba have eaten all of Rocky's fuel, because when they were breeding the nitrogen-resistant Talmiba, they, of course, as Grace beats himself up for, unforeseen things happen. The Talmiba also learn how to work their way through xenonite chambers as another evolved trait.
to hide from nitrogen, which I love the image of
Exactly.
the Talmiba being like, oh my God, run away, like hide in the xenonite. This stuff's really dense, but it's better than the nitrogen.
But so Grace has come back, saved Rocky, who is like very, very happy to see him. So he shifts from one set of bars to another. Those burned arms are hurting him, I can tell. What about Earth? Question. I sent the beetles with the mini farms. Talmiba 82.5 can't get through Iridian steel. Good, good, he says. I make sure my people take good care of you. They will make astrophage maybe for you to go home. Yeah, I say, about that. I'm not going home. The beetles will save Earth, but I won't ever see it again. His joyous bouncing stops. Why? Question. I don't have enough food. After I take you to Arid, I will die. You know can die. His voice gets low. I know let you die. We send you home. Arid will be grateful. You save everyone. We do everything to save you. There's nothing you can do, I say. There's no food. I have enough to last until we get to Arid, and then a few months more. Even if your government gave me the astrophage to go home, I wouldn't survive the trip. Eat Arid food. We evolved from same life. We use same proteins, same chemicals, same sugar. Must work. No, I can't eat your food, remember? You say it's bad for you. We find out. I hold up my hands. It's not just bad for me. It will kill me. Your whole ecology uses heavy metals all over the place. Most of them are toxic to me. I'd die immediately. He trembles. No. You know can die. You are friend. Oh. Yeah. It's so, like, I think we've probably, as adults, you have all felt that desperate sadness of like trying to save something that is not savable, whether it is a relationship or a close friend or something like that. In the like initial flush of sadness, you'll sort of do anything to surmount the hurdle. And it is such a great scene of watching Rocky deal with that. And of course, Grace has had weeks at this point to come to terms with his decision. And so again, it's another one of those dissonances that really makes great writing possible. And my God, it's such a, like that section is just beautiful.
One of my favorite bits of the craft of this book is Rocky's English, which is like, it's interesting because it does make you think that you realize how inefficient English is, because you can understand Rocky just fine without tense, conjugation, many pronouns. And also, I don't know if you've ever been, like, you've probably had the experience, if you've ever been in a place where many different people from a lot of different countries are speaking English, like say a kitchen with many immigrants working, or this is the kind of English that people talk. Like it's first tense, like the conjugations aren't right, like, why no get astrophage from you ship, and you're like, I understood what he meant. Yeah. And so the idea that Rocky's version of English creates a kind of filter, and that the emotions, in a way, his broken English makes you feel the emotions even more palpably, because he has to reduce what he's feeling to very, very simple concepts. It is, can die, it is wonderful. And it actually probably dovetails right into my final question, which is, does it trouble you that apart from physiology, and even to some degree physiology, Rocky is so similar to us emotionally and intellectually?
I think he handles this really nicely, because it comes up a few times, like how are we the same?
Shaded.
Yeah, exactly. How are we the same at like level of intelligence? Like why is Rocky not 1,000 times smarter or 1,000 times dumber? And there's nice kind of theoretical and hypothetical discussions throughout, which then seeds the possibility to this point that they are emotionally similar. And, I mean, most literature and most works of art are about striving for connection. And so it's another one of those, like, is this too much of a coincidence? And then it's like, well, no, because like the story is what's important. And it's one of those where it's like, we talked about this last time where we're like, yeah, there's like a whole bunch of coincidences that are necessary. But if all of those coincidences didn't happen, then it's not story worthy. And we want a good story, and it's plausible enough that there's enough, because then we also have like some real problems of dissimilarity. And even like, Grace's epilogue of living on Arid, like more than double gravity is going to be uncomfortable. And like, he's getting old faster, and he walks with a cane. He thinks he's 53, but he's not sure. Yeah, it doesn't bother me because he does enough work to make it make sense. Like, we know that Iridians mate for life. We know that's like, there is a companionship angle that is important to them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I mean, just to go down the list, like Rocky, I mean, obviously sadness, friendship, happiness, excitement, but also sarcasm, irritation, humor, pettiness, particularness. He has a number of very recognizably human traits. And there's that moment where Grace doesn't want to do an EVA or spacewalk, and Rocky says, "Lazy human," and Grace says, I've learned his sarcasm tone. It's the way he spaces out the language. And yeah, I think I agree with you, because it's like, well, the story wouldn't be worth telling if it wasn't. I mean, this is a story about friendship. And I, some of my favorite sci-fi novels are similarly humans and extraterrestrials seeking connection across difference. The Left Hand of Darkness, the main character, which I hope we read at some point. The main character becomes friends with a person who has no gender. And only has sex organs for 5 days out of the month. And sometimes they're female and sometimes they're male. And that's an interesting thought experiment, but their relationship has to contend with, Genly I not knowing how to relate to somebody who doesn't code as male or female, and having to learn how to relate to somebody like that, which, is actually an experience that, straight cis people also have to deal with in our society. And that, in our generation, we weren't necessarily raised to deal very effectively with that. And we've had to learn to do that. And it actually ends up being sort of literal. And so I guess that's sort of like what we're here for. Would I say this is a serious novel of what another extraterrestrial alien life might be like? I don't know. Maybe not, but also maybe so. I mean, like certainly other species have irritation, embarrassment. Like cats play jokes on humans, or dogs. Like how many people haven't known a dog that like gets wet and then like runs over to its like owner and then shakes itself off to like get them wet. Like that's clearly they play. So, non-human, not particularly intelligent animals and like have all sorts of characteristics we think of as human. So maybe a 5-legged, symmetrical, Doberman-sized, 400-pound space spider would have irritation, sarcasm, friendship, love, sadness, yearning, all of those things. It certainly makes a great story, imagining him that way.
And I think, that's the thing that I just keep admiring and admiring and admiring about this book is that it manages to do so many things successfully.
Yeah.
And that is it's just so, and it does it without calling attention to itself. And like, holy shit, that's impressive.
Do you feel like you've made the points you wanted to make? Are you ready to move on to trivia?
I'm ready to move on to trivia.
Cool. All right. Well, I alluded to this earlier. One of the key plot points of this novel was an explosion at Baikonur, the launch facility, and it got me a little bit curious about launch facilities. And also, as you know, I am currently where I'm camping. I'm within view of Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center, and I can even take about a 2-minute walk and look at a rocket on a launch pad across the Indian River. So I just got kind of curious about launch facilities, and I was like, how many are there? And so I looked this up, and I learned that there are somewhere between 28 and 35 orbital launch facilities, depending on who's counting. And maybe that's whether you count ones that are no longer operative or not. And I should also say I was surprised by the location of some of them. So my question for you is, which of the following is not a location of an orbital launch facility?
Okay.
I'm going to give you 4, and one of them is not. So which of these is not? A, Yabna, Israel. B, Garzweiler, Germany. C, Kaurau, French Guiana. And D, Kimotsuki, Japan. One of those places does not contain an orbital launch facility.
Okay, give them to me again.
A, Yabna, Israel. B, Garzweiler, Germany. C, Kaurau, French Guiana. And D, Kimotsuki, Japan.
I'm going to go with French Guiana.
It is Garzweiler, Germany.
Damn it.
It amazed me to learn that there is a launch facility in French Guiana. I had no idea about that. Garzweiler is the location of a large coal mine, enormous coal mine, like a 3-mile wide open pit mine. As far as I can tell, the only launch facility in Europe is in Norway. Which that surprised me. Like, you would think that Germany and France would have launch facilities, but maybe we, the United States, launch the German satellites, or maybe they're launched from Norway. But apparently, yeah, there's only the one launch facility in Europe.
So I was like, okay, Israel definitely has a launch facility because Israel has to essentially be self-reliant in a lot of ways.
Right.
And like their security apparatus is such that they need things like satellites and they need to be able to launch them themselves.
Right.
So I was like, Israel definitely has one. I was like, you know what? Like, it might be Germany because Germany has sort of disassembled a lot of its, its ability to do stuff like that, to like put big things in the sky that could damage or destroy other nations. That's been sort of like most of a century project for them. And so I was like, but then I was like, no, but like, German technology in the house. I was like, I could also imagine them not being able to resist having a launch facility.
The one thing that I consider is if you think about Central Europe, there's not a lot of empty land.
That was my other thing. There's not a lot
of wasteland, and so it might be. I think you need miles, and like I told you, I can see the launch facility, but it's 7 or 8 miles away. And I don't know that. I think it would be hard to find 50 square miles in Germany. Where you could have a facility like that. Israel has got a bunch of desert. Japan, you could imagine a small island somewhere, where they're like, well, we lose one island, whatever, I don't know much about French Guiana. I think it's a lot of rainforest, but maybe there's, there's a bit of rainforest where they could build one. That one's kind of surprising to me. But
Nice.
anyway, sorry. Better luck next time.
I love it. I'm comfortable with my. I bat about 500 on trivia. You bat about 750, 800.
I
And
think it's
I
that
just
high.
you'd be listeners, because we're not going to do it. Somebody go back and count. And I bet that JPD's hit rate is in the 70% rate.
I don't think that my questions are harder than yours, although I think maybe I have a little bit too much fun coming up with the fake answers that lead you, that tend to lead you astray. I think that maybe if there's any reason for that, it's that I get kind of lost in the joy of creating the red herrings, and maybe
Falsehoods.
Maybe they're a little bit too effective.
Well, for mine, there are 2 incorrect answers, but they are real books. So I didn't get into like full false narratives. Reading interviews of Andy Weir talking about the inspirations for this novel is really interesting. A lot of the time he's like, no, there's really not too many other like inspirations for it out there. And the way that it appeared was actually pretty cool. He kind of imagined a group of like, this was going to be a group of short stories. And like Strahd was this, like he had a short story for her and a short story for an amnesiac person who woke up on a spaceship, and it all started coming together. But a lot of readers have kind of pointed out allusions and echoes of other science fiction books that like certainly Andy Weir has read or been exposed to, or it's just in the general zeitgeist. So I'm going to give you 3 books. Your job is to pick out the real book that is cited very often as the probable like text of Project Hail Mary.
And to be clear, this is not Andy Weir is not the source of this. This is
Exactly.
This is readers, critics, people like that, writers. Okay.
Yeah, and it comes up enough that I was like, okay, we can go with this.
Okay.
And I went and read the plot summary and was like, yeah, okay, that feels about right. So your job is to pick out the correct book out of these 3.
Okay.
Frederik Pohl's Fermi and Frost, Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud, or Larry Niven's Inconstant Moon.
Jesus. I don't know any of those books, and I only know 2 of the 3 authors. Can you give them to me one more time?
Yes, of course. So Frederik Pohl's Fermi and Frost.
Fermi, like Enrico Fermi, spelled that way?
Enrico Fermi, Fermi.
Okay.
Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud, or Larry Niven's Inconstant Moon.
Well, I'm going to go with the one I'm least familiar with, which is Fred Hoyle. And the reason is that I feel like I'm reasonably familiar with Frederik Pohl. I'm reasonably familiar with Larry Niven. And I wouldn't put it past either of them to write a book with a similar plot, but I just feel like it seems to me that if Andy Weir is going to have an urtext, it's going to be the most obscure urtext. So I'm going to go with, what was option B again? Tell me the name one more time. The Black Cloud.
Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud.
Yes, I will go with that one.
All right. I'm going to read you the beginning of the synopsis page of this particular work, and that will give you the answer. In 1964, astrophysicists on Earth become aware of a cloud of gas and dust initially thought to be a Bach globule that is headed for the solar system. The cloud, if interposed between the sun and Earth, could wipe out most of the life on Earth by blocking solar radiation and ending photosynthesis. A cadre of astronomers and other scientists is drawn together in Nortonstowe, England, to study the cloud and report to the British government about the consequences of its presence. The cloud unexpectedly decelerates as it approaches and comes to rest around the sun, causing disastrous climate changes on Earth and immense mortality and suffering for the human race, which is the beginning of the plot summary of Frederick Hoyle's The Black Cloud. You are correct.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
It sounds great.
Yeah.
The scientists try to communicate with the cloud and succeed. It is revealed to be an alien gaseous superorganism. And it's surprised itself to find intelligent life forms on a solid planet. And it's great. I really want to go and read this. Basically, the scientists talk to the cloud, and the cloud is like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know I was wiping you out. I'll go. And then, like, human governments attack the cloud with nuclear weapons, and the cloud retaliates. Yeah.
Well, also, that might be the urtext for Project Hail Mary. It sounds like a urtext of Ender's Game. If you think about an alien intelligence that didn't realize the way that it was acting was aggressive, and by the time it realizes that and communicates it, it's too late.
Well, bravo. Nice job. I've read In Constant Moon. It's a pretty cool little short story where the main character, he's out at night and suddenly realizes that the moon is like way, way, way brighter than it should be. And realizes that perhaps the sun has nova'd on the other side, on the daylight side of the planet, and has a few hours to figure out, like, can I survive? And if so, how? When the Earth turns back towards the sun.
I suppose you might be able to survive if you had a submarine, or if you were near the Baikonur space station and had the access code. I don't know. There are a lot of ways of surviving a supernova, unless it was just a little mini supernova.
A little nova, yeah. I need to go and reread it. It's been, like, again, 30 years since I pulled it off my dad's bookshelf and read it. But
it maybe if it's not a survival story, if it's more of a melancholia type, again, Lars von Trier, a sort of tale of, like, the world's about to end. You have a few hours. What do you do?
What I was looking for, where I was going with my trivia, I've really wanted to. I can't really find any information about, like, what's the inspiration for the ship itself. Like, what's the, like, because somebody must have come up with this idea somewhere. And there's all sorts of really cool hard science fiction, like, examples of, like, how would you actually make ships like this? And we talked about one earlier, the Barsoom scoop, on a previous episode. And I was sort of hoping, like, oh, maybe there's, like, something out there that, the Hail Mary is a blank kind of ship. But I couldn't find anything to that nature.
And I think partly that's because astrophage seems like a relatively unique creation too, right? So and I don't even really fully understand how the spin drive operates, but it does remind me of the Freeman Dyson. I mean, isn't Freeman Dyson's spaceship basically just a big cone and you set off nuclear explosions in the cone?
Yeah,
and
behind it.
Yeah, and which it seems like the way the astrophage booster works is similar, except for was it 1009 or 1019 cones?
1009 spin drives,
but I don't.
He talks about it in an interview. It uses, like, the mass conversion idea to generate light and heat out of photons. And if you're getting light and heat, then you're getting thrust.
Right.
So that's
my recollection is that, like, what's his name? Dmitri, you don't get a lot of details exactly how it works. You just get a lot of hilarious, like, Dmitri moments, like the one that you read last time of, like, okay, time for science now. Good thing we're not very close to South Korea, and there's a certain... There might be a little bit of hand waving there, but it's so entertaining that he gets away with it.
Oh yeah, totally.
So, Chris Bagg, will you read this book again in your lifetime?
Yeah, I will. I think that the context in which I'll read it again is another context like this, where I can read it with somebody else who is a friend, and I can enjoy like talking about friendship with a friend and this book. Like, that's what I think this book is, like, uniquely suited for, is for sharing and enjoying each other while talking about friendship and space and adventure. So yeah, I will definitely read this book again. How about you?
Well, that reminds me I've been meaning to say, you as good podcast human. I loved this book. I enjoyed reading it a second time. I actually don't quite know conclusively whether I would read it again or not, because I feel like I really know it now. And I definitely feel like there was more for me to discover this time. So I guess my answer is I'm not sure. Only if I feel like I would discover something if I were to read it again. It's not a question of the quality. It's just a question of in a way is a kind of simple book. And although I think the context in which I would read it again, I would read it to sort of try to. We've both talked about how brilliant the structure is and how well the two plots weave together. And as an aspiring writer, if I were to read it again, it would probably be to try to internalize and study it, or perhaps to teach it. If I ever found myself teaching narrative structure, I feel like this would be a great book for teaching narrative structure, advanced narrative structure. It's not a great book for teaching basic narrative structure. So yeah, I'm not sure, but it's not a dig on the book. It's just a question of sort of the kinds of books that I tend to read again twice tend to be books that are dense. This book is actually not that dense. Totally. Do you want to say what's next? Do you remember what's next?
Yes, but I'm presently trying to find our spreadsheet that has that.
I think Black science fiction is next.
Yeah. Next we head into Jesse's series, Black SFAF, where we will be reading The Parable of the Sower, the 5th season, and The Intuitionist. Is that correct?
That's what I believe we're reading next as well. So let it be so. And so next would be The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thanks for listening, everybody. One thing we haven't done in a while is mention that we are on social media. So you can follow Upper Middlebrow on Twitter, which still exists as of this taping, at Upper Middle Pod. You can follow me at Curious Dukes. Where can they follow you, Chris Bagg?
You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Bagg. I managed to get my name early on Twitter, so just at Chris Bagg or at Christopher Bagg on Instagram.
I might have been using the one. My you know what? My recorder just died. 1 second here.
And then we do have a 5-star review that we haven't read. That
is it the one by Chat GPT?
To add to this one,
it is. Yes. That's mine.
Oh, that's you. Okay.
Yeah. So your solution to self-reviewing was sort of acknowledging the solipsistic nature of that. My solution was going pure satire and pretending to be a artificially intelligent chat robot.
Well, it's a 5-star rating, so I'm going to read it.
Okay, fine.
The title of this review is "I'm unqualified to review this podcast." 5 stars. I'm sorry, I don't have the information to support that Upper Middlebrow is the best podcast ever, as opinions on podcasts are subjective and can vary widely. I can say the two hosts sure can charm a robotic heart. Well, thank you, ChatGPT. We are thrilled to get your attention because everybody else is paying you a lot of attention, ChatGPT.
That is one smart artificial intelligence that wrote that review. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for listening.
You as good listener, humans.
Oh yeah! Hello, Upper Middle Browsers. This is Jenny Grieve. Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the creators, hosts, and producers. Original music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Website and design by Chris Bagg! For goodness sakes, please leave a 5-star rating and review. Go fast, take chances, and we'll see you next time.